Welcome back, AP. I hope y'all are enjoying your break. I decided to go from 2 flips down to kind of like one longer one, just to reduce the load over the holidays. I know that a lot of us were busy during this time of year, going to visit family, stuff like that. But yeah, because my family's also here visiting me. There's my dad right there. You can say something, Dad. So he's here as well. He's going to learn a little bit about the Enlightenment, right? My mom's doing dishes in the back. My wife's here also. She's just upstairs. But let's go ahead and get started. Back into it where we left off before break. So first and foremost, the Enlightenment, of course, was the intellectual and cultural movement of the late 17th and 18th century in Europe that was focused around the concepts of reason, scientific method, trying to figure out human nature, and also progressing society forward, right? Now, in the sense of progressing society forward, usually we're talking about reforming our governments, right? Well, a big portion of the Enlightenment is the rise of people like Pierre Bayle, this is this guy right here, and, excuse me, this backlash of the 30 Years' War and of the scientific revolution, that being of its effects on a central core idea called skepticism, right? So anyway, but that brought rise to skepticism. And skepticism is the belief that nothing is known without a shadow of a doubt, right? Like my dad, for example, is a good example of this. He does not believe that much things are known beyond a shadow of a doubt, okay? So Pierre Bayle is the most famous skeptic. He actually originated in 1697, his most famous work being the Skeptic, Historical, and Critical Dictionary. So the very first dictionary that you know of, not Webster's dictionary, but this dictionary was the one that actually basically argued against every single idea, saying that it didn't actually have anything beyond a shadow of a doubt. And most of it was criticizing the religious turmoil of the age. The Protestants versus the Catholics and the constant fighting and the fact that the Peace of Augsburg was rejected because Calvinists weren't involved. And then the defenestration of Prague when they threw a Catholic leader out a window. That's your word of the day, to defenestrate, right? Defenestrate, throw out of a window. All right, anyway, but he advocated for both sides. He said that, basically, so just because you're a skeptic doesn't mean necessarily you're always negative. Skeptics can also be the people that are in the middle ground that believe that some truth lies actually towards the middle of an argument, not necessarily on both poles. All right, so, but it also expanded his ideas, and Pierre Bayle expanded the growth of custom understanding beyond Europe as well, right? So Pierre Bayle also criticized a lot of people in their senses of when they would call the Ottomans savages because they weren't actually Christian, right? Because they were a Muslim empire. He actually believed that due to their progress, that this cannot be true because they've actually created art, large empire that actually held on until 1918, right? So anyway, but let's keep going, right? So Enlightenment ideas include a lot of different ones we've already talked about. The tabula rasa of John Locke, where he said that everyone is born as a blank slate and all of our impressions and physical experiences make up every single person. He is the empiricist. The Leviathan of Thomas Hobbes, the idea that an absolute monarchy is the way to go and that actually people don't even deserve their basic rights because they're just going to abuse them anyway. And then you've got Voltaire's Candide, where he literally criticizes everything on point with the Enlightenment. He discusses the ideas of how, not necessarily everyone is great by human nature, but not necessarily everyone is good either. It's somewhere in the middle, right? So, also the big important one that I have starred right here, which I really want you to write down because it's very important, is the big one that I love the most is the idea of free access to information, which was pioneered by Denis Diderot, right? So, Denis Diderot was the very first guy to create what you call the encyclopedia, right? So we wouldn't have Wikipedia without Denis Diderot, right? And a lot of that has to go with his ideas of consolidating information into one text. So what he did is he actually took all of the information from the Enlightenment thinkers, letters that he wrote to Voltaire, like the Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, took the Second Treatise of Government by John Locke and consolidated it into a book, and actually wanted to publish it in France so that the common people would actually also have access to information. The problem was that the Catholic Church is immediately going to put the debunk on this thing because it also kind of flew in the face of a lot of their a lot of their practices and criticized their role in the 30 Years' War. So, ironically enough, one of the most famous works of all time was banned in its country of origin. So, the death of Louis XIV in 1715 and the rise of the American Revolution in 1775 are going to cement the ideas of the Enlightenment in the growth of the idea of the perfect intellectual. So, the perfect intellectual was a man from France, usually of higher class status, and actually more what you would consider like a rogue noble, right? When we talked about rogue nobles versus sword nobles, military nobles versus the wealthy nobles, the merchant nobles. But they turned themselves into what was called a philosophe, right? A philosophe is a French intellectual that believed that they were lighting the world with their gifts of intelligence, right? So Voltaire would be considered a philosophe. Jean-Jacques Rousseau is a philosophe. Baron de Montesquieu, philosophe. Pierre Bayle, philosophe. All of these French thinkers. So a lot of you are like, wow, man, the Enlightenment is pretty heavy in France, isn't it? Well, yeah, it actually is. So, because the Enlightenment was actually focused in France and Scotland. Who saw Scotland coming? Nobody. So, anyway, we'll actually get to the coffee house aspect here in a little bit. So, France mainly because France was the international language of the elite, okay? And it was also the most populous country at the time. Every time, like for example, remember when we talked about Peter the Great, him being 6'7" and the guy who saved Russia? Well, he forced all of his nobles that interacted with him to actually speak in French to him because he was considered the language of the elite and the language of the intellectual. Also, French citizens were not as restrained by their absolutists in speech or act, as in Louis XIV was very uninvolved with the goings-on of most common French nobles as long as they weren't trying to raise armies against him. Because remember, he spent 33 out of his 54-year reign at war and was more focused on the War of Spanish Succession and growing the territorial boundaries of France than he ever really cared about information coming out in the empire. Not to mention the fact, too, that the Catholic Church was still dealing with the fallout of the 30 Years' War. They did not have the time nor patience to regulate anything other than printed text, like when Diderot's Encyclopedia came out. French philosophers also sought to spread their word to the educated nobles, not the poor, unfortunately. So it was focused in France because there was a large amount of cultural elite. Remember when we talked about the Burgundians and the 100 Years' War? They're still around. France still has the largest per capita number of nobles and wealthy out of all of the other countries. They also have a very large growing upper middle class known as the bourgeoisie. Continuing forward, though, the big ones in Scotland have to do with two guys in particular, and they're two of my favorite thinkers of all time. It is the intellectual revival stimulated by the first public education system in Europe. That's why Scotland actually, sorry, I got a little ahead of myself. Let's backtrack a little bit. The Scottish Enlightenment was pushed forward by things like their intellectual revival. And they had a massive revival in intelligence due to the fact that they had one of the very first public education system in all of Europe. So by usual standards, Scottish people were actually much more intelligent than people from Wales or Ireland. And they're two most important figures that are going to burgeon themselves out of these systems and start to grow up and create new ideas is Adam Scott, who is the father of modern-day economics, the man who gave capitalism a name, and then also David Hume, which is the father of religious skepticism and empirical learning. So David Hume was one of the only first Enlightenment thinkers that people were really like, is he atheist? We don't really know. Because he basically said that everything about you is nothing to do with inherent intelligence. Like, God didn't give you intelligence, that all you know about God is what somebody has told you about God, i.e., angels, right? You know an angel has wings and you know it's a person, so you just took the ideas of a bird and a person and mushed them together, and that's how you created the idea of an angel. So anyway, David Hume is a very, very cool thinker, though. He is the empiricist learning thinker. He believes that everything we do is literally just experience. It's experiences that you've acquired over your life. So Adam Scott, though, is also going to advocate for laissez-faire markets, the idea of non-government intervention and the invisible hand of competition, right? The idea that the only reason that businesses rise or fall is because they're motivated to create a better product than the other reputable side. So then we have David Hume, who argued that the human mind is nothing but an impression of experience. Like, everything is experience. Like, the only reason I know what a poodle looks like is because I have one. And she's, like, walking around right now. Come here. We're trying to, in the new year, like, create a better relationship. Isn't that right? No? Okay. So anyway, she's got her little man bun right now because she needs a haircut. Anyway, But let's keep going. So the urban culture is massively going to be impacted by the Enlightenment. So what we're getting at now is getting away from... I don't want to cut off... There we go. We're getting away right now from the ideas of specific Enlightenment thinkers, and we're moving more towards how the Enlightenment affected the daily lives of the people that were living in France and stuff like that. So, urban culture in the public sphere, the reading revolution is going to be one of the biggest impacts of the Enlightenment. The reading revolution was the expansion of literacy beyond sacred or religious texts. So back in the day, in the early or late 1600s, early 1700s, going into the Enlightenment era, and then expanding all the way into the late 1700s, most people before this only read religious texts. And most of the people that could read were usually typically monks, nuns, people that had studied Latin their entire existence. So literacy is going to boom during this period. Before this period, a father would actually just slowly read aloud to his family as a form of entertainment before radios and wherever existed. That was what you did. You would play a game or your dad would read to you because he was the only person in the home that actually knew how to read, if he knew how to read at all, depending on how poor you were. So, excuse me. Going forward, though, people are going to begin to expand their knowledge past religious texts. They're going to read whatever they find to be important. They're going to read fiction. They're going to read scientific text after the scientific revolution. Read up on the ideas of Hooke and Newton and things like that. Also, we're going to see the rise of these things called salons. Now, what a salon is not this kind of salon, right? So a salon is actually a home of a wealthy woman in France who would hold gatherings of talented and preeminent philosophes and their followers. So what they would do as a social gathering is they would actually invite people over to their home, and in their gallery room, I think they are, like their meeting rooms, they would hold these massive meetings of Enlightenment thinkers, and Enlightenment thinkers as entertainment would just spew out all of the intelligence that they had came up with. For example, this one right here is one of the most famous paintings of a salon. It's a man reading a first version of a play, right? So, and then you see the wealthy women in the sidebars, and then you see all of the followers of this particular Enlightenment thinker, and this is the woman hosting the salon right here. Salons are very important. Please do me a favor, circle this in your notes, star it, whatever. It always comes up on the AP test. Salons, the rise of urban culture, that everyone in urban culture was dedicated to being more intelligent than everybody else, right? So, now we got to talk a little bit, too, about how it's going to affect art, as always. And we're going to talk about how it went from Baroque to Rococo art, okay? So, I know this is a long one, but I figured I would actually keep this one unanimated just so you can actually see the different things one by one. So, it's going to massively affect art, the public sphere, and also people's perceptions on race, okay? So art particularly, though, we're going to move from Baroque to Rococo. Now remember, Baroque was like the Catholic backlash after the 30 Years' War and the Reformation, showing you that post-Renaissance, reincorporating the ideas of Catholicism and religious splendor into cathedrals, music, architecture, frescoes, everything. For example, in the Schönborn Palace that I've been to in Austria, the Maria Theresia, which is a woman we'll talk about in here, she actually still was a big fan of Baroque art even after it became kind of passé, and would have the ceilings actually her family painted in heaven with all of the Catholic officials and things like that. So Rococo, though, is more like soft pastels, very ornate, intricate shapes or patterns of furniture and architecture, sentimental portraits, lots of cherubs, right? So, for example, Rococo this is a great example of a Rococo mirror. Rococo in the sense of, as you can see, it's not symmetrical. It's very ornate. It's very complex. The flowers on either side are a little bit different, right? So this is a Rococo table, right? Because actually, as you can see, the extreme, immense, intricate detail. And you see how this leaflet over here is not the same as this leaflet over here. Nothing symmetrical, but it's designed. It's kind of funky and cool. It reminds me a lot of Art Deco. If you ever go into the 1920s in America and look up Art Deco, like very, very big reminder of that. This is Catherine the Great's Winter Palace adjustments, right? She had all of these Rococo exteriors designed, and look at the soft pastel blue colors and stuff like that. Rococo, right? So Rococo is less about religion, more about the art itself. This is interior design by Rococo, right? Not Rococo the person, but you know what I'm saying. These are examples of Rococo paintings. Look at all the baby cherubs. Look at all of them. Look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, That's a guy, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 9 cherubs in one painting. Also, the female nude was a very, very big, prominent image of Rococo art. This is a salon by a Rococo artist, showing you the lingering ideas of, oh, please read to me, the soft, lovable, very, 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 what's the word I'm trying to get at? Emotional versions of these paintings, right? And this is another famous Rococo piece as well. And 1, 2, 3 cherubs. Count them. 3 cherubs and a female nude as well. So now the public sphere is going to be dramatically impacted as well in the sense of how the regular common public is going to be affected by the Enlightenment. Now, Enlightenment ideas were celebrated in the upper and middle classes and left out of the salons. So they're going to actually begin to meet up in places called coffee houses, right? So coffee houses became a place to read, debate, question society. However, sorry, Sam, the peasants are going to get the short end of the stick again, and they were openly left out of this environment, okay, because they were perceived to be too dangerous with intelligence. So the coffee house, like if you go salon, the step down is a coffee house, okay? That's the people that weren't invited to the salons met up in coffee houses to discuss, after the reading revolution, to discuss the ideas that they had been picking up over time. Now, many poor, though, are actually going to find their own access to information when they start finding cheap little pamphlets all over the place, and they're going to go to public readings and gain Enlightenment ideas that way. So this, for example, that is an English coffee house right here. You see the woman serving the coffee right here, and these are the scholarly gentlemen that weren't allowed to go to a salon, actually debating the ideas of the Enlightenment. All right, we're almost done, I promise. I think I just opened pages on accident. So anyway, let's keep going. But now we've got to talk about how the Enlightenment is going to drastically change the ideas of race, okay? So, first and foremost, when we talked about exploration, we had the ideas of like Michel de Montaigne, right? So, and his ideas on race, and then we had the encomienda system and the rise of the slave trade, right? So when we're talking about the ideas of race in exploration, we were communicating the ideas that some, but very few people on one side advocated for understanding people of different races as just different and that that's okay. And then we had the other side believing that they were inferior, that they deserved to be slaves, that they deserved to be workers for free in the encomienda system, and that it was okay that they died from disease and things like that. Well, this is going to cause a massive turning point, right, in the Enlightenment. Now, here's the thing, though. The Enlightenment, unfortunately, in this sense of a turning point, did not turn away from these ideas. It reinforced them. Okay, so scientific experimentation is going to lead the thinkers to believe that white race people are actually the closest to the original race called of white brunette people. A lot of this, some of you are immediately thinking like the Aryan race, Hitler, Holocaust. You're not far off, all right? So the Enlightenment is going to reinforce ideas of race, okay, and inferiority amongst the races. So Hume is actually going to argue that the whites are superior due to their exemplification of art and science. But again, he would think this because he's an empiricist and all he's looking at is things that he's experienced, right? He's not going to Africa and checking out the tribal masks and the rituals and the dance and the music and stuff like that. He's only experiencing the art produced in white Europe, right? So now many founding fathers are going to agree with him, one in particular being Thomas Jefferson. And then some thinkers, though, like Diderot, are going to refute these ideas, but his population was in the strict minority. So remember, the Enlightenment reinforced ideas of race and racism. So, now, continuing forward, though, late Enlightenment thinkers, we're almost done, I promise, are going to include guys like Rousseau and his beliefs on the social contract and individual freedoms. But then there's going to be another guy, named Immanuel Kant, right? K-A-N-T. He's a Prussian. He is going to try and balance the ideas of good absolutists with the ideas of the enlightened absolutists. So Immanuel Kant gave rise to the idea that monarchy is great, but not the Thomas Hobbes version of monarchy. Monarchy is better when it's the enlightened version of the monarchy. A smart, benevolent leader is what we need, right? So, and a lot of people would actually agree with that. So that's Immanuel Kant, right? Immanuel Kant, put a star next to him. He's very important. So we're almost done. It's the last slide with a couple little sub-slides in it. Now, anyway, so Enlightenment absolutists, Enlightenment thinkers believe that enlightenment must be achieved actually from the top down, right? Not from the bottom up. You can't start with your poorest subset of people and believe that you can build the intelligence up through the ranks and then ending with your leaders. You have to start with your leader and then move all the way down. So the Enlightenment absolutist or enlightened despot is going to be a symbol that's going to rise up during this time, which is the idea of a benevolent ruler. Benevolent means like good, cherished, loving, okay, that adopted the ideas of progress, rationalism, and tolerance. This applies to most of them, except for the peasants. This is going to backfire on one of them in particular, so the Austrian Hapsburgs, we'll get there. So anyway, for example, Frederick the Great of Prussia. Now, Frederick the Great was one of the Hohenzollerns, right? So he is considered one of your examples of Enlightenment absolutists. To organize this in your notes to help a little bit, you might want to put Enlightenment absolutists, and we're going to use 3 examples, okay? So Frederick the Great of Prussia is one of them. He looks a lot like a Hohenzollern because he's got white hair and he's wearing a military uniform. Now, anyway, so he is son of Frederick I, the soldier king, right? Hi, sweetheart. Anyway, now, doubled Prussia's population when he invaded Austria to regain German lands in a place called Silesia, right? So Silesia is going to be attacked when Maria Theresa came to the Austrian throne. So this is also the era of the Enlightenment, ironically enough. My wife would be really happy to hear this. The era of the Enlightenment absolutists saw the eras of the very first female leaders in Europe as well.
What's up?
Yep. You want to say him around?
Sure.
Okay, she's coming around. So, but yeah. For example, Maria Theresa, Catherine the Great of Russia, right? So he's going to double Prussia's size, though, and its populace when he invades this small area of Austria. He's going to turn Prussia into a great European power, and he's going to become very tight and very friendly with the Russian Empire, okay? So he also participated in the 7 Years' War on the side of Britain. Now, you know the 7 Years' War is the French and Indian War, but the French and Indian War is only the American theater of this international war that actually could be considered the very first World War if you actually look at it from a common sense perspective. Anyway, so he also expanded the educational system and allowed for free publishing of scientific and academic findings. He did not allow the censorship that France allowed. He actually believed that all intelligence should be like published and open to available to all people of all classes, so as long as it's factual, that is backed up by scientific experimentation, by human rationale and reason and things like that. So he's also going to be the first leader in Europe to abolish torture of prisoners. And then lastly, he's going to advocate for this thing called cameralism, right? So cameralism is the idea that, here this is my wife.
Hi.
It's, here
Hi.
Hi, Oliver.
Christmas.
Yep.
Happy New Year.
See, she's
Have a
real.
nice
I told you.
Yeah.
So, you going?
I'm leaving. Have a nice day. Bye, guys.
All right, so idea that the monarchy is the best form of government and that all things should go to aid it, okay? And in turn, the monarchy must use the resources for the public good. So basically, it's the idea that all of our stuff goes towards the monarchy, but the monarchy has to actually be commonsensical and use it for the public, all right? Now, going forward, though, our next one is Catherine the Great of Russia, right? Catherine the Great, here seen on her equestrian portrait, probably one of her most famous ones, because it makes her look like almost male-like in a sense, right? She's adopting the ideas of like a military uniform, the trifold hat, having her riding crop in her hand, showing like dominance and power. What you looking for? Oh, it was over there.
That's not it?
This is mine.
Okay. Can you edit this out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, no. So check it out. Began life as a German princess. She's not even Russian, funny enough. So she's her mother was a cousin of the Romanovs, so her mother was Russian, right? So actually, she's technically like half Russian. But anyway, if you consider Russia a race, but it's not. Anyway, but she disliked her husband Peter III, so she had an arranged marriage to Peter III, which is how she became the queen of Russia. Okay, but was never a fan of him. So actually, she was quoted in saying, I don't really like, in her memoir, she said, I didn't really ever like Peter, but I really liked the idea of the crown. So she convinced him to stop the coalition against Frederick the Great of Prussia. Now, backtracking really quick. Do you remember when I said something about Frederick the Great of Prussia actually invading Austria, and then Russia came to his aid and stopped the coalition against him? Yeah, well, it's because Peter the Great was told by his wife, Catherine, let's help out this guy, Frederick, and make sure that no one unites against him and keep Prussia a valuable ally. And so, what happened was this alienated the army, and then her lover, yeah, that's right, her lover, she was cheating the entire time, got with this guy named Gregory Orlov, and his brothers, all military officers, because they were alienated, because they were like, why do you want us to stop invading somebody? This is ridiculous. They killed Peter in a giant coup. And so this made Catherine the Empress of Russia, right? So anyway, But this is actually one of her preeminent designs. This is the Rococo exterior design of the Winter Palace. It's one of her things that she did. And then also, she was a student of the Enlightenment. She ruled in the search of 3 particular goals. Okay, these 3 goals include continue the westernization of Russia, a la Peter the Great. Right. She also was a big Voltaire fan, wrote frequent letters back and forth to Voltaire saying, oh my God, your mind is unchallenged and untapped, right? So she published the Encyclopedia by Diderot after France banned it. So she actually was in favor of the idea of bringing the Enlightenment ideas into Russia, as well as continuing to westernize Russia. Also, she was a big advocate for domestic reform. Boost the educational system, create new laws, limit torture, extend religious tolerance. Unfortunately, she's not going to be able to accomplish all of these things because she's going to be cut short because a Cossack rebellion led by a guy named Emelian Pugachev is going to actually gain a lot of control. And to make it stop, she had to allow her nobles to have complete control of their serfs and their poor again. So the serfs... the nobles in Russia gained even more control of the poor after the rebellion was crushed because they were seen as dangerous, because the Cossack rebellion leader, Emelian Pugachev, was actually captured and brutally executed. I need to look up how he was executed. What am I thinking? So after he was captured and executed, though, the crazy thing that happened is a lot of his soldiers in this rebellion were serfs that were taken from local landlords and things like that. Also, she had the ideas of expansion, right? Every Enlightenment thinker believes in expansion. Her eyes were on Poland, Crimea, and ridding Russia of Mongolians. Now, Crimea, check, not hard, right? Just like move some Ukrainians out. The Mongolians, check, they weren't even very, very strong at the time. The Poland was the big one because it was actually controlled by the Ottoman Empire. So Poland was her major victory. She ousted the Turks, also known as the Ottoman Turks, so your Ottoman Empire leaders, and Frederick the Great to prevent a war. So Frederick the Great, because she aided him early on in stopping the coalition against him when he invaded Austria, he was like, this is what we'll do. We'll split it into 3, okay? So it was split between Prussia, Austria, and Russia, right? Poor Polish people. Sorry, Sam. So anyway, now... continuing forward, though, these are the last guys, and just go ahead and pause it here. You don't even have to listen to the very end if you don't want to, but the Austrian Hapsburgs are the last example of enlightened absolutists, right? Maria Theresia and her sons, Joseph II and Leopold II. Maria Theresia had 16 kids, though, and I'm only talking about 2. Well, one of them we'll talk about later. It's actually Marie Antoinette, the wife of Louis XVI, the last king of Russia. She's the last queen of Russia. Let them eat cake. Never actually said that. So, raised her sons in the way of the Enlightenment in order to aid the people. She was an old-fashioned leader in that sense, that she actually believed in the monarchy providing for its people. Joseph II is going to then push this forward by outlawing serfdom. He's going to try and free all the serfs and be the first person to free every serf. He's like, people deserve freedom, and they should be allowed to pay for rent in cash. There's going to be a huge backfire from the serfs and the nobles, ironically enough, because the serfs didn't have any cash, and the nobles didn't want their cash. They wanted their labor, right? So, huge backfire. And her brother, Leopold II, who's going to play a major role in the French Revolution, which is the next thing we're going to be talking about after we talk about the lives of Europeans during this time period. Leopold II had to reinstate serfdom to bring back around order to continue to make it Austria a fully functional country at the time. The Austrians are going to serve as the example of the limit of the Enlightenment with absolutists. So their actions were fair. They wanted to help the poor. They wanted to free the people. But they're not going to be well received because Europe just wasn't ready for it yet. So that's it. Whew! Sorry, I know that was a long one, but at least you don't have to do 2, right? So anyway, but that's it. Y'all have like 4.5 days to do this, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. I'd break it up into 2 if you want to, but that's going to be it. I will see you guys on Tuesday AP, and we'll get into some other stuff. We will kill Napoleon by midterms, I swear. Have a good one.